Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. And welcome to Talking with Teachers, a podcast brought to you by the Lamppost Education Initiative. I'm your host, Dr. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. And today we have a special guest by the name of Dr. Jonathan A.C. Brown. A lot of you may know of him. So, inshallah, we want to start by speaking a little bit about his bio, and then we'll bring him onto the screen. As many of us know, Dr. Jonathan Brown is the Al-Walid bin Talal Chair of Islamic Civilization in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He received his BA in History from Georgetown University in 2000 and his doctorate in Near Eastern Languages and Civilization from the University of Chicago in 2006. Dr. Brown has studied and conducted research in countries such as Egypt, Syria, Turkey, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, et cetera, et cetera. You know, there are many different places. Well-traveled individual. He has many book publications. Some of them are very central to my own teaching. And he has multiple published articles in areas of fields, including Hadith science, Islamic law, Salafism, Sufism, Arabic lexical theory, pre-Islamic poetry, among other things. So Dr. Jonathan Brown is an important scholar in the English language, in the English-speaking, English-speaking societies. And we like to welcome him on right now. So Dr. Jonathan Brown, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Really nice to have you with us today.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Of course, it's a pleasure, it's an honor to have you. As I stated, personally, that I utilized multiple works of yours in a number of my classes that I teach at Sunnah. But before talking about that, I actually wanted to speak a little bit about yourself. You know, and I think that most of us know you as an academic, as a Muslim academic, but not much is known really about your sort of journey overall. You know, so who is Jonathan Brown? Who is Jonathan Brown?
Oh man, I mean, it's just such a fit now. I mean, inviting someone to talk about yourself, tell us who you are. I mean, I guess you asked me. I mean, I'm just answering a question. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm a Muslim. I'm a scholar. Although, you know, it's really interesting when you were talking, I was like thinking about this and I was like, should I talk about this? Maybe it's like a distraction, but I think it's actually maybe more core than I thought. I mean, a lot of times there's these, people do these like online criticisms of people. Some of those people who are criticized are me. And, and sometimes, they'll be like, Jonathan Brown called himself a Muslim scholar, but he only studied for like a year in Egypt and stuff like that. And like, I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm like completely unqualified to be like a faqih. I'm completely unqualified to be a muhaddith. I'm completely unqualified to be, I have a ijazah to teach like a few books, a few small books. Okay. So I don't really, like, I don't understand. To be like, oh, how can he be Muslim scholar? I've never claimed that. I would never. It would be an idiotic claim. I mean, it would be an absurd claim, right? I'm a scholar in the sense that I am someone who studies the world and studies history and studies the world around me, et cetera, right? But my training is primarily in the Western Academy. I mean, I did enough training in kind of Islamic traditional sciences to know, how to make my way around when I need help, when I don't understand something. But so when you say, who am I? When I say I'm a scholar, I don't mean I'm like an alim. I mean that I'm someone who seeks knowledge and who tries to answer questions, and in doing so, help myself and help others to understand.
Well, you're definitely a scholar. I mean, there's no doubt about that. From anyone who actually reads any of the books that you've published, the issue of what you're not is not really what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with what you're like, okay, family background, how did you come to be what you are? Your journey, your life journey, family background, etc. Those type of, what put you on the path of the academy? Was it just like a spur of the moment idea? Was it something that you were sort of being groomed to do by your parents or others around you? Those are the sort of things I'm concerned with. Of course, there's always going to be criticisms or those who critique us about certain things and say you're not this, you're not that. On one level, it adds up to noise, but on another sense, I think the appropriate attitude to have is that it comes with the territory. That once you start to put your ideas out front and center, then you have to expect that there are going to be those who don't like some of your opinions, and ideas, So it's, so really, again, I think, you're definitely someone that I personally believe that has contributed a great amount of important insights, to the Muslim community, to the world, even, I would say, because some of your books, if not all of them, are translated to more than one language. So yeah, it's more about, okay, but what's your family like? Who are your parents?
I'm also not an Olympic gymnast. I mean, there's a lot of things I'm not. You're right. It'd be kind of stupid to talk about stuff I'm not. I'm not, a professional fencer, for example. So it's kind of,
I had to throw this in because I like your comedy, your sort of your jokes, because even in your bio, at the end of the bio, it's mentioned on Georgetown that you appeared on ESPN, but you've never watched it.
Yeah, I am a funny guy. That I will say, I'm definitely a very funny guy, and I would love to hang out with myself. That would be really wonderful. So, it's funny. Also, you asked this question about my parents. My mother died in 2010. My father died in 2016. I don't have any cousins.
Mm-hmm.
One of my aunts I was really close to died in, I think, 2016 as well. And my sisters, they live with their families. They live far away, and they have their own lives and stuff. One of the things that I think I've reflected on is that, I don't see like a lot of my friends from my early life, like they've all moved away. And I'm ironically, I live in, kind of Washington, D.C. area, which is where I grew up, but I'm maybe the only person of my friends that grew up here that is still here. So the point of what I'm trying to make is that it's very hard for me to remember my life. I don't know if anyone else has this problem, but like when you don't have people to like remind you of things, like, oh, remember the time when you did this? Oh, remember the time when mom did that? And when you don't have people to talk like that with, things just sort of just like my memory, it just vanishes. It's like there's nothing that I actually can't remember what like a day was like in my childhood. I just have flashes.
So what did your parents do? Were they both professors?
Yeah. So, I mean, the irony is, although I'm saying this, right, obviously my parents had a huge impact on me. And, I loved my parents very much, and they were, I don't, especially my mother had a really big impact on me. And also ironically, like a lot of my personality is sort of just this leftover of kind of mid 1990s America before I was Muslim. But anyway, so my family, my parents were, my mother grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. Her father was a professor at Yale. He was a professor of chemistry, physical chemistry. So he had a PhD in physics and chemistry. And her mother, my grandmother, was a historian of science. She taught at Albertus Magnus College, which is I think it was an all-girls college, I think in New Haven, because Yale was not co-ed until 1977.
Mm-hmm.
And she had she had her PhD from Oxford. She did a PhD in history of science and she wrote a couple of books on British science in the 1700s, 1800s. One book on Mary Somerville, who was a famous female scientist in that period. And then, so my dad grew up in basically Oneonta, New York, which is apparently in upstate New York. I've never been there. But his father was as I discovered after my dad died and found this material, my dad's dad was born and raised Orthodox Jewish, and his parents were Lithuanian Lithuanian Jewish immigrants who came to and settled eventually in northern Ohio, a place called Warren, Ohio, and my great grandfather was actually the head of the synagogue there. Apparently, I've never been to Warren, Ohio. Actually, I have been to Warren, Ohio, randomly one time on the way to Chicago. I stopped to go to the bathroom there. But anyway, but he and his siblings, his brother, my great uncle, was actually a very famous war correspondent named Cecil Brown. He actually has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. You can go and see it. It's Cecil Brown, and they all changed their name. And all the kids, there are 3 kids, or one sister and the 2 brothers, they all changed their names and they all abandoned their religion completely. And my grandfather, my father's father, married my grandmother, who was from this very snooty patrician English family, WASP family in Ohio. Actually, that her father's family had founded Cleveland, Ohio. So she was a descendant of Moses Cleveland, the founder of Cleveland, Ohio. But they had, and they were quite wealthy, but during the Great Depression, they lost all their money. Not because of the Depression, because they got swindled out of it by their accountant or something. But my grandmother, I remember when she was very old, I mean, she would talk about this, but when she got really old and like had strokes and stuff, and would sometimes have, like, she would think she was back in like the 30s or the 40s. Which is actually really interesting because she would tell me, like, go to this store in New York and here's like a nickel and go and get this, put the nickel in the machine and get me this sandwich from the machine. Like it was really interesting from a historian's perspective to hear her basically go back and like reliving these moments. But one of the things she would do is she would start to cry because she remembers her mother had polio. She couldn't walk. Her brother had curvature of the spine. So he was never really a healthy person, and he died in his 30s. And but she would remember that time when they went from being very wealthy and having all this care and servants and stuff to when she had to go out and work in the library to make money to support her mom and her brother. And she would cry when she had these memories. So she ended up getting married very late because of that. And my grandfather, my dad's dad, they were both from Warren and Ashtabula, Ohio, and he really loved her, and he like kept pursuing her, and finally she agreed. And then my dad's dad, mashallah, he became a very successful businessman, and he eventually became an owner of lots of newspapers and radio stations through the Northeast, and was a very successful businessman. And so then my father went to this boarding school place called Kent, which is oddly where Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's dad taught. So if my dad were alive, I could ask him if he had Hamza Yusuf's dad as his teacher. But I don't know. I mean, obviously he's not alive anymore, so I can't ask him. But so that's really,
after he passed away, you found out that information after he passed away?
Yeah, exactly. Because I was talking to Sheikh Hamza about this, and he mentioned it. I was like, my God, my dad went to Kent. So then he went from Kent, he went to Yale, and then that's where he met. So it's interesting. Like my dad, I never talked to him about this. I don't know if he even was conscious of it, but my dad's mother was very, very, very snooty. I mean, in one way, she was extremely snooty, but in one way, she was like very open-minded. For example, she never batted an eyelid that I became Muslim. So she wasn't kind of closed-minded and traditional in that sense, but she was very conscious of her background, of her like nasab, that she had this illustrious ancestry. And the way she talked was like this mid-Atlantic. You sounded like you're watching like a 1940s movie where they're in, in like some a high society party, and someone's like, "Oh, would you like some champagne?" She would speak like that even when she was old. But she married this guy who had basically abandoned his background, but he was still a Jew, right? So she kind of married her marriage was sort of controversial, but her dad was like a no good Nick. So her dad, Orrin Cleveland, was basically kind of a gambler wastrel who like left them and went off and she didn't really have much of a relationship with him. And so she was like the strong person in her family. So she just did whatever she wanted. She eventually married my grandfather. He had also basically been like kind of forsaken by his parents, because his parents were really hardcore Orthodox Jews, and their son was like, I'm not Jewish anymore. I'm marrying this Christian woman. I don't know what happened, but they didn't have a relationship after that. So my dad, I think, only once saw his dad's parents. And my dad's mother's parents had died. I think he met his mother's father once. But her mom was like polio ridden. She died relatively young as well. So my point is, my dad grew up really, really waspy, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And in some ways, I think it was like a compensation for his mother, compensating for her loss of status, and his dad trying to get as far away from his background as he could. So my dad was almost the most waspy guy I know. Actually reminds me a lot of Donald Trump, not in the sense that like my dad was a very smart, intelligent, nice person, but just like the way they kind of naturally assume the world just rotates around them. Like everything in the world has to kind of make sense to them, or it's just kind of not worth considering. So my dad went to. Is this like boring? Should I be talking about this?
No.
Okay, so then my dad went to Yale, and he met my mother, who was back like with her dad, in vacations and stuff. And my mom, mashallah, was very, very attractive. I mean, objectively speaking, obviously, I'm not, whatever. So she was like, he really liked her a lot. He pursued her for a while. Eventually, she agreed to marry him, and they got married in 1968. They both graduated from college in 1966. And then I went into so much detail. This is crazy. So then, so my mother, so then my dad, he was really active against the Vietnam War in college. And he was also very active against segregation. So in the summers in college, he would go to St. Augustine, Florida, and do things like register Black voters. And he would stay in these like Black neighborhoods in St. Augustine and other cities, and he would do like these voter registration. I'm not sure what he was doing, but that's what he did. And then they would have like protests, and he would be in the protests, and he got like beaten up by the police. He got beaten up by the Ku Klux Klan. He got put in the hospital. He got arrested, all this other stuff. And he wanted to be a journalist. So he started to write these things for like his local newspaper, which of course were owned by his dad. So they got published. But then some of those articles actually got entered into the congressional record, the U.S. congressional record. So you can, in fact, one of the kind of epigraphs at the beginning of one of my book, I think my slavery book, I actually have a quote there. So I remember reading that. Yeah. Yeah. So there's so it's really interesting. So he was kind of he was not like he was too young, it was too early for him to be a hippie. But he was really into kind of social activism. And then he went to, he wanted to be a journalist. So I got a master's in communications from Annenberg School of Communication, University of Pennsylvania. And then because he was going to get drafted he went into the Peace Corps. I think he went to the Annenberg afterwards. I can't remember, but he went into the Peace Corps when he got married with my to my mom in 1968. And my mom very nicely went with him. They got sent to Chad. So Chad, like today, is probably a pretty rough place. Chad in the 1960s was like super rough. I mean, they were living out in the middle of nowhere, like teaching English and like teaching people how to chicken farm. They were chicken farmers. And then they came back. I think that's when he went to Annenberg School for Communications. By that time, the Vietnam War was over. And then he, I don't know why he did this, but then he went to Harvard Business School. And then he went and worked for the World Bank. And it's interesting because like, I remember when I lived in Egypt, and it was like in 2000, 2001, I remember talking to my dad on the phone and saying, you know, I see so much poverty here around me. Like, I don't know how to deal with it. Like, it really, like, it's really upsetting. I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to deal with it. And I said, how did you deal with it? And he said, that's why I worked at the World Bank. I mean, it was interesting because I never knew why my dad had done that, but I think he was really affected by his time in Chad, and he really wanted to work in development work. So he went to work at...
They say eventually, but eventually he becomes a professor. You saying so after all this, or
no? This is my dad was not a professor. My dad worked his whole career at the World Bank as like a manager and like division chief and these things like that. Yeah, so that's why I go, but it's funny because my dad, like, I mean, although he was working in development, World Bank people, especially back then, they got paid a lot of money. So he worked there his whole career, and that's why we lived in Washington, D.C., because he was based at the World Bank here in Washington, D.C. And then, although he got sent to Senegal, one of his first jobs, he was made the first resident representative of the World Bank in Senegal. He opened up the mission in Senegal. And so we went to live for the first part of my life. We lived in Senegal, and then we came back to Washington, D.C. So,
yeah,
my dad was. It's interesting because he was very, very principled about certain things. Like it was absolutely unaccepting of any racism or discrimination. And I remember because when I was getting married to my wife, like her dad at the time was under house arrest. He had this big case against him by the U.S. government, accusing him of being like a essentially terrorist, money launderer, et cetera, et cetera. Samuel Ariane, if any of you in the audience want to look it up, you can see this stuff. And so when I was wanting to get married to Layla, I was like, oh, I gotta tell my dad, I gotta like let him know. I mean, I don't need his permission, but like, I mean, I wanted to like let him know. I felt like I should let him know this was kind of be part of his life, And I told him, and he said, I'll never forget. He said, if you don't marry her because of this, I'll never talk to you again. Right. So he said, if you didn't marry her because of this, I would never talk to you again. So he was very, very principled about this, the idea that you don't treat people differently because they're being persecuted by the government or something. Right.
Right.
So,
because like when you mentioned earlier, you mentioned that a lot of your relatives, they decided to abandon their religion. So I'm assuming they were Jews. Right?
Oh, okay. So then my dad was raised Christian by his mom. So his mom was like this very, again, I'm sort of snooty, high society, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Episcopalian woman, right? And part of being proper human being was being Episcopalian and going to church and everything. So my dad went to church his whole life, every Sunday. And we were raised Christian. We went to church every Sunday, Episcopalian Church, All Saints Church in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And me and my sisters, we were all acolytes. So we did we're the little kids who carry the cross, and they wear like the white robe, white top, and there's like a red gown. You can see, it's like imagine these British cathedral choirs and stuff, exactly like that, right? So we would do, in fact, I went all the way up through the entire course of acolyte. So I would, to the point when the most senior acolyte will help the minister prepare communion. And so I did that. It's also how I learned that I was definitely going to be an alcoholic, because I loved the communion wine. And like when we got a chance as an acolyte, you got the first crack at the communion wine, the communion goblet. And I was like, I took the biggest chugs I could out of that thing. When
How old were you at the time? How old were you at the time?
From probably, I'm just guessing, from 9 to probably 15, 9 to 15 or 16. Yeah.
They were like kids, 9 years old, to drink the wine.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, that was like that was like the best part of the week. So, I mean, you get like one sip, but I would try and take a big one. So then, yeah. So, okay. So then my mom's family, they came from Texas. So both my mom's parents were from Texas. My mom's dad was from Texarkana, which is right on the Texas-Arkansas border. My mom's mom was from Mejia, Texas, which is a sort of between Dallas and Houston, I think. It's a really kind of middle of nowhere. Both places are. They both ended up at University of Austin, and that's where they met and they got married. They both came from very religious families, Presbyterian, Texas Presbyterian families, but they both completely rejected that. They thought it was hokum. They thought it was nonsense, superstition. And my grandmother would tell a story that like one time someone in her house like came down, like, I saw an image of Jesus on the wall. And I was like, oh, praise be to Jesus. I don't want to make fun of it. They're all like, praise be, whatever. And then my grandmother went and saw that it was actually like a reflection of this picture in the hallway on the other wall. And so that was sort of her, this, science disproves all this stuff amendment. Right. And so they both became scientists. And then in my grandmother's case, historian of science. And so they were very anti-religion. They had very strong Texas accents, which I find funny. My father worked in Boston and California and Hawaii during World War II. He was like made part of the Army to do develop sonar for submarines. After that, he went to teach at Yale. After being in Boston during the war, he went to teach at Yale. And I think he and his wife were always very conscious of being Texan, but being in the North. They had very strong Texan identities. They were always insulting the North. They were always like talking about the war of Northern aggression. They taught us that the Civil War was about states' rights, et cetera, et cetera. Like they were very strict. They were very emphatic about this. And then, they had a bunch of kids, mashallah. Although only my mother got married. Only my mother had kids. So my mother went to Bryn Mawr, which was a girls' university, still is all girls' university near Philadelphia. And her sister also went to Bryn Mawr, one of her sisters, and they were kind of super first wave or second wave feminists. I don't know. They weren't kind of radical feminists, but they were, like their mother, extremely upset about opportunities being offered to men that were not offered to women. Right. So that was something it was a major concern of theirs throughout their lives. And my mother then she went to the Peace Corps with my dad. So she went to Chad. She learned French. She learned all these different Chadian languages, a couple of them. And then she wanted to be an anthropologist because she had been at Bryn Mawr and she learned about anthropology. She loved studying other cultures. She loved studying like Native Americans. She loved all this stuff. And so she went to University of Cambridge in England to do cultural anthropology. And then she wrote her dissertation on Chad because she kind of used her time there to kind of extend it into field work. She wrote her dissertation. She wrote one book in French. She wrote a couple articles. And, but she taught for a while as like a visiting professor at American University here in Washington, D.C. And it's interesting though, because she didn't, I always remember my mom not working, right? She was always at home with us. She took care of us. And, she would once a year, she would go away for like a month on some trip to do development work. Because it's interesting because I thought that she had consciously not wanted to go into academia, but had wanted to do this development work. But when she died, I was like going through all her stuff and I found that she was constantly applying to jobs. But, because she was based in DC, there's only a few jobs she could get. But I think she always wanted to be a professor, but because there just wasn't really an opportunity, she ended up doing development work. And in Chad. She worked in Cameroon. She did some in Yemen, and she would basically advise companies on like how to. So she ended up in a later part of her career making a gob of money doing this because she worked for ExxonMobil, and because ExxonMobil was drilling for oil in Chad, and they need to figure out how you, like, if you're buying this land, how do you compensate people properly? Like, how do they understand land ownership? How do you give them things that's actually be useful for them, that's not going to be just, destructive for their lives? So she worked a lot, and she made like mashallah, a bunch of money doing that. And so, but that was after I had already gone off to college. So it was like later in her life. So she was
like there's a lot of diversity there. I mean, a lot of experience, a lot of diversity, even somewhat ideological. And I wonder if or I imagine that perhaps some of that diversity, even in your family, played a role in the way that you actually write. Because if we start talking about, for instance, your books, and we actually haven't spoken about, okay, even your conversion, like, well, when did you become Muslim? How did it even come about? But fundamentally, the point I wanted to make was that one thing I love about your writing is that you appeal to, conservative mindset compared to appeal to progressive mindset, and so you quote, from multiple sources, and you actually consult multiple ideological people of different ideological backgrounds, right?
yeah, this I learned definitely from my mom. I mean, one of the things that she, as an anthropologist, like, she was all about trying to understand people's perspectives. So she was really, and I think this for her was the biggest argument against religion, quote unquote, for her, because, it was like, if you get in someone's mindset, everybody's religion is true from their point of view, right? So if you're able to like inhabit someone else's view completely and authentically, you don't really know how to judge what's correct. So you just kind of end up being agnostic. And that was my mom's perspective. Although once or twice, she would oddly only talk about this when she was drunk, which didn't happen that often. My dad was always blotto drunk, because I guess this is like what all white Anglo-Saxon Protestant people do. But my mom, I remember when I was older, like kind of in college or in grad school, talking to her, and she would kind of get like a few drinks in her. And then she would start to then I would start to kind of discuss religion with her. And then she would say, I acknowledge there's the one God, there's the creator and revelation.
Like your mom says this.
Yeah. She could, when she was not drunk, she was true. Her identity as an anthropologist was her religion. It was like this very, it was like an armor around her, and she would never kind of loosen that. And she would never really, you couldn't really discourse with her about stuff.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. Then so you become Muslim when?
So it's funny because I grew up pretty religious in the sense that, like, I was going to church every Sunday, but I was the most religious person in my family, I think. But it's weird because we would go to church, but then I think because my mom was so against religion, I don't know what happened, but I imagine she basically had to talk to my dad. It was basically like, not in the house, right? So we would go to church, and then that God was not mentioned any other time. So it's like a really weird, it's going to make a lot of sense, I think. So my sisters are just completely irreligious. And I really believed in God. I didn't understand anything about Christianity. Like, I went through Sunday school, I got confirmed, everything. Like, but I was just like, I don't understand any of this. I understood Christianity much better later on, like in grad school, studying it as like, from perspective of studying history of religions. But as a Christian, I was like, I believe in God, but I remember like being really scared for my mom, and I was worried she was going to go to hell. So I remember like one time taking the communion wafer. So you could do things. You could either take a sip of the wine, which of course is what I did, or you could dip the wafer in the wine. And so what I did is one day I took an extra wafer and I kind of snuck it and dipped it in the wine. And then I put it in my pocket, and I got home and I wanted to give it to my mom so that she would like be able to go to heaven, which is kind of like making me cry. I never thought about this, but kind of like funny thing to do. But
yeah, but it's the
yeah,
sounds reasonable, right? From a
yeah.
yeah.
You know, I probably was like, I don't know, maybe 10 or something, or 11. I don't know how old I was. So then I was very close to my mom, and I was very close. I mean, I love my parents very much. They were very good parents. They were really loving. They kind of showered us with love. They were very principled. My dad, I remember one time I started saying something bad about this girl in my class, and he's like, why would you ever want to hurt somebody? I was like, why would you want to do this? Why would you want to hurt somebody like this? That always sticks with me. My mother was just someone who loved learning, and she taught me, I think that the thing I learned the most from her, one is to really like try and see things from other people's perspectives, because it doesn't really like, just if let's say you're writing a book on, you know, like Asharis versus Atharis or something, right? It doesn't, like, you sit there and just sort of make fun of Asharis and like they think this stupid thing. Like they don't actually think that. Like, they actually, what they think is sophisticated, because nobody thinks stupid stuff to themselves, right? So you know, لا تأخذ يعني قول الآخر من غيره, you know, like you don't, if you want to understand someone's position, if you want to argue against it, you have to understand it accurately, listen to what they're saying, really figure out what they think, and then you can evaluate it, right? So that I learned from her. And from her, I also learned that, you know, the world around you is full of stuff to explore. And, you know, there's never, being bored is kind of, doesn't make sense. Like, there's always something to learn about. Let's say you're sitting in a room and there's nothing to do. Like, you could look around you and think, oh, wonder what this wall is made of. I wonder, like, you know, what's the ratio between the wall and the ceiling? Or like, you know, there's always, the world is always full of knowledge for you to learn. And every person you meet is a person to learn about. Their life, their stories is something to learn about. So I learned this from her. And okay, so then I went to, I feel like I'm like taking all this time. So I went to high school. My dad went to boarding school. He said, you're going to boarding school. But he didn't want me to go to this like Northeastern boarding school. He said, there's a school in California, which I really like, called Thatcher, and you're going to go to this school. It's near, it's in a place called Ojai, California, where Sheikh Hamza went to high school. He went to high school at Ojai Valley School, the competitor of Thatcher in Ojai. No one knows about Ojai, California. I mean, this is like this weirdest similar, like parallels between my life and his life. He went to Ojai Valley School. I went to Thatcher. Thatcher is, I think, without argument, the better school, but he might disagree with me. So then I went there for high school, and it was a very, I mean, I had a great time, but it was a very like kind of California, progressive, crystal power, whatever makes you feel, whatever's good, you know, love one another, very kind of liberal, progressive values that you're taught. So I didn't really, like, I wasn't being led in on any path religiously.
Okay.
Although I remember, because the school is like on the edge of a national park, so we would ride horses. So I would go riding all the time and train horses and do like horseshoeing and especially training young horses. I love doing that. And so I would go out into the mountains by myself or on the horse, and you know, just kind of like search for meaning in nature in a way, I guess. Because I started to really have a lot of anxiety. You know, I guess maybe all teenagers have this, but I had a lot. I was like, what is the point of my life? What's the meaning of life? Why I'm going to die one day? What is, how am I supposed to mean anything? How am I supposed to, how is my existence supposed to mean anything? And so when I went to college and I decided to go to Georgetown, although I was from Washington, D.C., I never really lived there as an adult, so I didn't know the place at all. So I went to Washington, D.C., to Georgetown. But by the time I went to college, I was really thirsting for knowledge, thirsting to learn, and definitely seeking truth. And I always told myself, if I learn the truth, I will follow it, whatever it is. And so when I got to Georgetown, they still have a theology requirement. You have to take 2 classes in theology. The first one, you either take something called Problem of God or Intro to Biblical Literature. I took Intro to Biblical Literature. The second class, I just randomly took a class on Islamic thought and practice, it was called. Taught by a Lebanese Palestinian woman named Maysam al-Faruqi, who is the niece of Shahid Ismail al-Faruqi. So I really learned. I went in and she said, like, look, I'm going to teach you Islam from perspective of Muslims. Like, you're going to now step into the shoes of a Muslim. And we read Muhammad Asad's Road to Mecca. We have Muhammad Asad's translation of the Quran. We read books by Fazl Rahman. And the Road to Mecca just like blew me away. I mean, it was like melded with my mind perfectly. And by the end of the semester, it was weird because I remember sitting in class being like, this is actually what I believe. Like, this is when I was sitting in those church pews and like I believed in God, but I didn't really understand anything else about what I was being taught. Like, this is what I believed. This is what I was believing, Right. And so when I went to the end of the semester, I went to the professor, and I said, like, I think I believe this. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm Muslim? And she said, that's a choice you have to make. This is your choice. And so that summer, I thought a lot about it. And
how old were you then?
How old was I? Yeah. I was 18 and then turning 19.
Oh, really? Okay, you're teenager. Okay.
So when I became Muslim, I was 19, I think. And then so I started my sophomore year of college. I remember they had like the MSA dinner. It was like kind of in October. And I went there and I kind of was really shy. I was like I kind of want to become Muslim. And of course people came and helped me. And that was, ever since then, that's just it in my life.
Right. But look at you now. You're full professor at Georgetown University, right? And
it's interesting because, like, when you ask who am I, like, I think in one way I'm a Muslim who's, everything I've done as a scholar has been answering my questions that I had as a Muslim. Like, every book I've written, every article I've written, it's always, I want to know this as a Muslim. I need to answer this question. But one could also look at my life and say, look at this guy's mom, look at her parents, their professors, look at how he was raised. He's raised, he's very someone could have looked at me and probably said, oh, this guy's going to be an academic. Right. But I never thought about that. I never thought I would be an academic. I thought I would be like a lawyer or something. I thought kind of being a professor was sort of like a loser job. I don't know why I thought that. And I actually recently was talking to my sisters. I was like, listen, I always thought being a professor was like a loser job. And even when I was in grad school, I had trouble admitting I was going to be a professor. And I don't know where that came from. And then they said, probably because our grandparents, my mom's parents, were so negative about everything. They they never said anything good about anything. So probably I just associated negativity with being a professor because they were very negative. And so I don't know, maybe that's why. So, but I mean, I'm so grateful to be a professor now, obviously. So somebody could say,
no, go ahead.
Someone could say, like, this guy's career is because he's Muslim, which is true. And this guy's career is because of how he was raised, which is also true.
Yeah. I think that's, that makes sense. It makes sense to me, and I think that, again, I appreciate quite a bit about many of the things that you write. And like myself, I mean, most of what I know about Islam, I think I could, legitimately say that most of what I know about Islam originates from like Arabic sources, because even still now, like most of the books that I read are usually in Arabic. And so I'm not well versed in English, literature with respect to Islam. as you would be, or a lot of other people are. So, but when I do look for something that in English, you're actually one of the first people I would look at. Okay, he had a lot of books. I've seen if Jonathan Brown has written anything about this. Not only because I enjoy your writing, or that a lot of the information is available, but because I respect the fact that you're willing to deal with a lot of the topics, controversial topics that I generally have an interest in as well. But perhaps for a different reason. For me, it's I would say that not so much about trying to find answers for myself, but if I try to answer for the Muslims, for my students, because I know that not getting certain answers are going to cause a crisis of faith. So, you have like misquoting Muhammad, for instance. Misquoting Muhammad is like extremely valuable work. All the books, you get that, slavery in Islam. I have a few books in front of me. I actually from misquoting Muhammad. Typically, when one of the courses I teach is family law, I actually utilize the section about the hitting birds, right from here. So I for the students. In the slavery in Islam, we typically go over the section on consent and concubinage, because also I definitely want our sisters to get a proper understanding of that issue. And I try to help them work through, try to understand, what was going on. But what I've been teaching longer than anything else is this book. Of course, this is a second edition, the Hadith. And sometimes I get tempted to send you a text or say to you something like that. I probably know this book better than you do.
Yeah, I get really frustrated because there's some stupid mistakes in it, and it makes me like really upset. I get so upset about mistakes in my books, and I try to, I unfortunately publishers, like, they don't, you can't just sort of make a new edition every time you feel like it. But I just, there's some mistakes in that book that really drive me crazy. It's hard for me to feel any joy about it.
Yeah, that's normal. I think that that's to be expected. It's definitely a challenge once you're published, when somebody discovers your mistake, and hopefully people do it in good spirit, with sense of goodwill, right? Highlight those type of things as opposed to, oh, these guys are fraud. Look at this. So I think that because we might make a mistake, or because we have made mistakes, that itself shouldn't be reason not to publish, not to write. And I think that's the wrong attitude. Some people's attitude is that, well, if I'm afraid that if I publish, that there's going to be too much criticism, therefore I'm not going to publish it. And I just don't think that that's really serving the world or the community overall. So I've taught Intro to Islam. I've utilized your Muhammad, a brief introduction. So I've used a lot of your material over the years. But again, the basic point is that when I'm typically trying to look for something in English for students who are not very good at Arabic, okay, well, I'll look at someone who is like yourself. There's a very short list of Muslim academics, that I actually do consult, or rather I try to refer students to, because in my experience, I've had some bad experience with certain Muslim academics, so
I can imagine.
I generally don't look in their direction, to actually promote them, right, to either my students or the general public. So,
yeah, I completely understand that.
Yeah. So, but you are you interested in speaking a little bit about any of your books? Even the most recent one that came out, was Islamic Blackness.
Yeah.
So, is there anything you want to talk about? Maybe the thesis of any of your books, that perhaps people may not be aware of? Well, let's take that one for instance. Since I mentioned it, Islamic Blackness.
Yeah.
What is your thesis? What is it? What was it? What were you looking for in your writing?
So, I think it was, it was born out of this debate that was happening about, is Islam anti-Black? Mm-hmm. And a lot of the kind of evidence that people who said Islam is kind of anti-Black at its scriptural level, right? The evidence they were putting forth. And so people kept asking me questions about this. And so I was like, okay, I'll try and answer it. And eventually I was through the process of trying to answer it. And of course, looking at books like your book and Sherman Jackson's book and Dawood Walid's books and people like that, right? And Abul Haq Ashanti's books. And so I was sort of trying to get this material together, figure out when people hadn't answered a question, try to improve, fill cracks, add on to stuff. So it was really kind of trying to address that accusation, and in doing so, also to understand things that that like might be difficult. Might actually like, hey, this does seem anti-black. How did this happen? Or how do you make sense of it? Or why is it? So I think a lot of the stuff that is maybe a constant theme in my books is one to show the diversity of Islamic tradition. Not for the purposes of saying that like, oh, you can't say Islam says X because Muslims say more than one thing, right? That's not what I'm trying to do. But like the point is that if you have, for example, let's say there's a certain hadith, and then in their commentaries, certain scholars will say like racist stuff about this, right? Yeah. That there are also huge scholars who are saying, no, that's wrong, right? So that Muslim scholars there will always be some scholars, and usually major leading scholars, who are pointing out exactly the same thing that someone else is trying to point out today, right? So these critiques are not new, and they've already been addressed. And if the majority position amongst Muslim scholars is wrong or is debatable today, well, there is it's not just like one guy, but there was like a camp of scholars, some of them major scholars, who said the opposite, right? Who anticipated this discussion. So that's one thing I think is a pretty consistent theme in my works. The second one is, my wife's calling me. Hang on, just send her a message. The second one is in. So the second one is that a lot of these discussions, let's say about anti-blackness or about slavery or about all the things, right? So they're really about the issue isn't kind of Islamic thought or Muslims or Islam, right? It's about it's also the inability of people to transcend certain modern Western worldviews, right? So like for example, on issues of slavery or issues of blackness, like we need to think about actually what is slavery? When we talk about morality and history, what are we doing? Like, what are our assumptions in our kind of modern Western, global Western society? And some of those assumptions are very problematic. So I also try to kind of engage in self-reflection about the very questions we're asking. How are the questions prejudiced? How do they presume certain things that are highly problematic, right? So I think those are very much always present in my books.
Yeah, exactly. I can see that. Definitely. Now, in this particular series that I've been trying to put together, relationship to what we call talking with teachers, I wanted to try to have my guests to speak about one or perhaps more individuals that they consider to be important for the public to know about, whether it be persons from the past, from the present. It could be related to scholarship or religiosity, whatever it may be. Just important people that are not very well known, but have important ideas or have important contributions that you believe would be very useful for the average person. So you mentioned someone before.
Yeah.
Haifa Khalafullah. I mean, who is Haifa Khalafullah?
Yeah. Dr. Haifa Khalafullah. So she was, so when I was in college at Georgetown, so I was in college from 1996 to 2000. And, after I became Muslim, which was beginning of my sophomore year, I just would take any class I took about anything to do with the Muslim world, Islamic, anything, Islamic, Middle East, anything. I was so thirsty for knowledge. And I didn't know, because when I learned about Islam initially, it was really through kind of like Fazlur Rahman, Muhammad Abdu, like a very kind of modernist, Islamic modernist perspective. So I didn't really, I sort of thought about like ulama are like these people in the past, and then they become like defunct, or they're kind of this class today, but they're all kind of idiots and they need to be reformed, right? So that was really my perspective. And when I was a sophomore, I think a second semester of my sophomore year, there was a class being offered. I looked in the course catalog, and it was called Islamic Law and Society, taught by Haifa Khalafallah. And she at that time was a PhD student in the history department. Although she'd be called a mature student, right? She was significantly older than the other students. So she had been, earlier on, had been a journalist in the Arab world, and especially writing about like petroleum journalism stuff, and also like politics, and writing in Arabic and in English. And then she was Egyptian, so she had started to go and listen to the lectures of Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, the famous Egyptian writer, died, I think, in 1996, I believe. And so she got really into kind of Islamic thought, and kind of understanding Islam. And she decided to go do a PhD at Georgetown in the history department to do this. And so she was teaching this class as a PhD student, and she was doing her dissertation on the books of Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali. And so she taught this class it was like her part of her talking about her research, right? And what I found so interesting about Haifa and about the stuff I was learning about was she really introduced me to the idea of Islamic thought as a living thing, right? That Islamic thought isn't something that's in the past that you're sort of dissecting, and something that has to be updated, that like we kind of modern Westerners, we have only like that sort of Islamic modernism is the only way to think about Islam. Like she showed me the world of Muhammad al-Ghazali, who's like a living alim, like a scholar who's dealing with the tradition in a creative way, right? So he's like a living example of this. And one of the first, and then so she's also told me, she's like, you need to go learn Arabic. Like, you need to go learn Arabic well. You need to go to Egypt. And so then I applied to this program called CASA, Center for Arabic Study Abroad in Cairo. It's a 12-month intensive program. And I went from 2000 to 2001. And she also told me, when you go, because she had attended the lectures of Sheikh Ali Jamal in Cairo, right? Yeah. So she says, go, I'm going to give you introduction to him. And you go to him and you take classes with him, go to his classes. And so when I went in 2000, I just began to attend his lectures, and then continued to do so for the next couple of years as I would go back to Egypt for months, sometime at a time, sometimes 1 month, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 8 months. So, and it was really like, that was when I realized that, yes, there are a lot of dumb ulama, but that's because there's a lot of dumb everybody, right? So, I mean, any university, or like you say, you go to some kind of mid-range university or something, probably not, a lot of professors are not going to be superstars. Right. But you don't judge kind of a science or a tradition by its mediocrities. You judge by its excellent representatives, right? So, when you go and you meet people who are really great scholars, then you're like, whoa, like these people, I'm a little nobody. And these guys, like I say, oh, I'm Western, I have critical thinking skills. And then they just like demolish you. Right. And then not only do they demolish you, but they also memorized, like you're sitting there being like, like a Quran, hadith, and they're just like, cite this verse, cite that book, cite this hadith, cite this poetry. I mean, not only they have a huge, like kind of massive database, encyclopedic knowledge, but they also have extremely critical minds, right? So, and effective reasoning. And so then I really learned, like, wow, these are the people that I need to learn from. Like, this is why I want to learn. And then that introduced me to the idea of Islamic thought as a living thing that exists today. And so it was really through Haifa that I was exposed to this. And I was always grateful to her, always be grateful to her for this.
Yeah, Rajat. That's really interesting because, like, I don't think I've ever like mentioned this publicly, but often when I think about the whole that tradition, the tradition of fatwa tradition, it seems to support this idea of the sort of living Islamic tradition. In other words, that we often don't think about fatwa as being part of the overall corpus of Islamic law, tradition. In the sense that it can be taken as a source for normative sort of adoption, right? But it's like, okay, well, it's all circumstantial. The fatwa is going to be based upon circumstance, whereas you have the which are these are the ideal situations you're going to apply these. But when you try to sort of, I guess you'd say, codify a school or codify some type of that statutory system of rules, right? Then it seems to me that Islam is somewhat resistant to that because of the fatwa tradition, right? And of course, Islamic law is only one aspect of Islam to begin with, But of course, we have our virtue ethics, we have creed, etc., all these other things as well. It's an important reflection that I just had just by listening to what you said about her. So I'm definitely going to look into her works. And so I saw one book, Ghazali.
Yeah, I think she wrote a book on her. It was probably her dissertation. I don't think she, I haven't been in touch with her recently. Maybe a few years ago, I emailed with her. I should be in touch with her more. I feel terrible. I'm very indebted to her. I dedicated my Islam and Blackness book to 3 people, to Maysam al-Faruqi, to Haifa Khalafallah, and then to my advisor in grad school, Wadad al-Qadi. They really, were important, obviously, people in my life. But yeah, I've like I remember one of the first books I read in Arabic. It's like when you're learning to read, you're looking up like every 4th word or something, like was actually Muhammad al-Ghazali's Sunnah Nabawiyya Bayn Ahl al-Fiqh wa Ahl al-Hadith, the prophetic sunnah between the scholars of law and fiqh and scholars of hadith. Right. And that, like, I read a lot of his books, and he was really one of the again, like maybe my second entryway into Islam.
Right. That's the Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I remember I still have his seerah, his fiqh seerah.
Yeah.
Really important work. Yeah, but mashallah. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we close today? Anything that you feel that the audience should know, or what some general direction, advice, or anything like that?
I don't know. I would just kind of try to leave the lesson that I learned from my mother, which is that the world is a fascinating place, and there's always chances to learn. And don't be cynical. Don't be lazy. Don't let laziness. Don't out of laziness be dismissive of learning. Always be open to learn, and don't ever dismiss somebody because of where they're from or that they disagree with you, but always take their arguments seriously and see they might be speaking the truth. They might benefit you in knowledge or in faith or in anything. So that's what I guess my lesson would be.
Alhamdulillah, beautiful. Dr. Jonathan Brown, really thank you for being with us today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. And hopefully this won't be the last time that we have a conversation like this. Perhaps it'll be something a little bit more robust in the future, but inshallah, definitely appreciate you taking time.
Jazakallah khair. I'm very honored, and I hope it's useful for somebody.
Inshallah. Assalamu
alaikum.
So we hope that the rest of you enjoyed this particular episode. Look forward to seeing you in the future, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum. Wa sallallahu sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi sallam tasliman kathira. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Hopefully you enjoyed that episode. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel here on YouTube and Spotify. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. God willing. Peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.